something in the sanctuary. They used the courtyard as well as them using the holy place right here. This was all part of the daily service. Now we're going to look at the daily service for a second. Now the courtyard, remember we talked about the courtyard? The courtyard, everything that happens in the courtyard happens on this earth. So remember that. So when we're talking about what the priest did in the courtyard, we're talking about what Jesus came to do upon this earth when he comes to this earth. But when we talk about the priest moving inside of here, the people didn't come in here, just the priest. Because the priest is a symbol of Jesus. He's the one that after he finishes the work, comes up into the sanctuary here to do the work in the sanctuary. So we find the courtyard represents earth, where the sanctuary itself represents heaven. Now, everything that happens in the daily service was telling a story about the plan to redeem man. So, as we examine the work that they did in the daily service, it's going to show us two things. It's going to show us the footprints of Christ, and it's also going to talk about us. It's going to give us our part in doing this, okay? So we're going to look at this together. Now, first of all, you've got to know that the daily service consisted of them bringing in 2 lambs, okay? They brought the 2 lambs, and they had to be without spot, okay? And these were brought in to be part of the burnt offering, okay? Now, you'll notice that one lamb was to be offered in the morning and the other lamb was to be offered in the evening. So the daily service had a morning and evening sacrifice, okay? So that morning and evening must be telling us something. So in the morning, what would happen is they're going to kill the lamb. So all the people stop what they're doing and they look toward the temple at the moment that time is taking place. That is representing their prayer time, which we'll see in just a moment, okay? And at evening, there was another time they would stop what they were doing, and again, they would be kneeling, looking toward the temple. Now, here's the thing. What's the purpose in the sanctuary? The sanctuary's purpose is God's house, number one, but also the plan of redemption is seen in the working of the sanctuary. You will notice that the sanctuary is telling the story of how man is supposed to be separated from sin. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, the lambs being killed is a symbol of you and I looking at our sins and offering them to God and letting Jesus take our place. In the evening time, after you've worked during the day, now the evening time you do the same thing. The lamb was killed on the north side, okay? Because it tells us, oh, and by the way, this is where we gave you a double portion today of the gifts today. Because on the Sabbath day, there wasn't just one lamb offered, but there was also 2 more that were offered. So instead of just being 2, they had the 2 for the Sabbath plus the 2 on the daily service. So that's 4 on that particular day. And it was killed on the north side. So basically what I want you to see is every detail dealing with this sacrifice, every detail is talking about the burnt offering representing Jesus, representing our sin offering done in the morning and the evening on the daily service. Now also on the daily service, there was another piece of furniture that was addressed, and that was this one here, okay? And Aaron shall burn thereon sweet incense every morning. So every morning Aaron would come in here and he would be burning the incense here as well as dressing the lamps. Okay, that was done in the morning. Okay, you will notice that Aaron lighted the lamps in the evening. So in the evening he comes back, he lights them again, and he also works upon the altar of incense. So the daily service consisted of the work in the courtyard, dealing with the lamb upon being killed on the north side, as well as the candlesticks here and the altar of incense. This was all part of the morning and evening sacrifice, which they repeated every single day, all the way down to the time of Jesus, twice a day. Now, there was a time that Zacharias, during the time before John the Baptist is born, that his experience was he was to go into the sanctuary, and his job was to light the lamps, light on the altar of incense, which was the custom there. And it says, it comes to pass that while he executed the priest office before God in the order of his course, according to the custom of the priest office, his lot was to burn incense when he went out into the temple of the Lord. Went into the temple of the Lord. Look what's next. And the whole multitude of the people were what? They were praying without at the time of the incense. So here he is. He's doing this offering here. The work is being done in the courtyard. The work's being done in here. This was considered the people's time of prayer during the time of the incense. Also, you'll notice that David even says this. He says, let my prayers be set forth before thee as incense, and the lifting of my hand as the evening sacrifice. Okay? So he's saying my prayers, that's the symbol of this piece of furniture here. It was being done with the incense. So we're seeing that he says that that there was an evening sacrifice dealing with the prayer time. Look at this one here. This is found in Acts chapter 3 verse 1. It says, now Peter and John went up together into the temple at the, what is it? Hour of prayer, and he gives the time. He calls it the 9th hour. Now, understand something, that what they did as the sun would rise around 6 o'clock, that's when they start their hour, okay? So you have the first hour, but the 9th hour, if you follow from that point on, brings you to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So now we know a time in which the evening sacrifice was being done. We know it was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because of these Bible verses. There's not a Bible verse that nails down directly the first one, the hour in which the first one is done. But we do find it here before we're done today. Okay, so now basically we looked at the daily service. Now we're going to look at how the daily service is going to be performed by Jesus when He comes upon this earth. But as we do this, I've got to share with you that there's a path that you and I are taking, and there's a path that Jesus takes, okay? So what I did was I put a cross there at the entrance of the sanctuary. And the idea that I came with is this, that the cross sitting there at the entrance is on the east end. The sun comes up in the east. So when I look at the sun gives me light. It lights my path. Okay, so as I see the sun is traveling from the east and he's traveling west. So I'm looking at the sun, I'm saying, wait a minute, that is nature showing me the direction to travel through the sanctuary. And you'll notice that when that sun hits that cross, it's going to cast a shadow in front of it. Just like a shadow, if you stand in front of the sun, it's going to cast a shadow. So if you look at the sun casting a shadow, it's going to go across this piece of furniture. It's going to go across this piece of furniture, and it's going to enter into this room right here, and the arms of the cross is going to be these two pieces of furniture. As you see, it travels in to cut this piece of furniture all the way into the most holy place. So what I want to share with you is that is the path that Jesus has to take and you and I have to take. Now, I will tell you this. If there's a meeting you do not want to miss, it's tonight's. Because tonight we start walking on that path. But as I'm going to show you how Jesus sees what He's supposed to do on this path, understand, that means we should see something we are to do ourselves on that path. Okay? Jesus gets on that path. Okay, we're going to go on to that path. Okay. Now, Jesus, He starts in heaven. Okay? So, this represents heaven right here. He starts in heaven and He comes from heaven to this earth. Okay? Now, you'll notice that when He comes to this earth, the first mention we have is Him being born in Bethlehem. So we've got to place Him on the path, okay? So we're going to put a line there from the holy place to the laver, okay? We're going to keep Jesus on this path. Now, you'll notice that He's born in Bethlehem. We hear very little about Him until the age of 12. Then at the age of 12, Jesus comes to the sanctuary, right? And as Jesus comes to the sanctuary, now he sees the work that's being done in the sanctuary, and now he recognizes that's going to be me. See, he recognizes now he's the Lamb, and he sees what's happening to the Lamb. Now he understands his work. How do you think he knew when his time was to start his miracles? How do you think he knew when his time was when he was going to die on the cross? How do you think he knew these things? Because the sanctuary foretold it. The sanctuary gave him the times that he needed to know, so he knew when he was to respond and move in the working of the sanctuary. Look at this. Now, staying on that path, the first thing that he's going to come to is a piece of furniture that has water in it. And you'll notice, basically, you hear nothing more from the age of 12 until he reaches the time at the age of 30. And I find that very interesting because John is baptizing the people there in Jordan, and John sees Jesus, and he says, "Behold the Lamb of God that taketh away the sin of the world." Then Jesus is baptized at the age of 30. And I find that quite interesting because I have just went through with you the tribes that were on the north and south and the west end. These priests could not do the services of the sanctuary because they were providing the offerings and the things needed for the offering. And Jesus comes not as a priest, but he comes as the offering. And they started their work at the age of 30, and now Jesus begins his ministry at the age of 30. Now, as I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, wow, maybe that's a coincidence. But as I examine the rest of the story, I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's not a coincidence. God says, my way is in the sanctuary. In other words, he's telling you, look at the sanctuary. You want to know my way? Go to the sanctuary. Look at it. And so we find that Jesus starts at the age of 30. But now, after his baptism, he starts his ministry, okay? We already talked about that. But he starts his ministry. And so basically the distance between this piece of furniture and this piece of furniture is now going to be the 3.5 years that Jesus is working for his Father. At this moment in time, he's healing people. He's directing them to God. He's doing this work. But then he finds himself at the age of 33 and a half at the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, at the Garden of Gethsemane is the next piece of furniture, the altar of sacrifice. Let me show you how I come to this, okay? If you will notice that, that Jesus comes to... I went backwards, sorry about that. When Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is there with Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he begins to be very, very sorrowful and very heavy. He nearly dies, okay? So you notice he got strengthened by the angel, right? So during this time that Jesus was there, he was receiving the sins. Remember, the sin was taken from the lamb and placed here to be burned upon the altar of sacrifice. We'll see that more in the next nights. This is where Jesus receives our sin. Your sin and my sin is what killed Jesus. He almost dies here. But he doesn't. He can't die here because the offering was always killed on the north side. And so we find that Jesus sweating great drops of blood is falling to the ground, and we find all this taking place, but he can't die there because the Gethsemane the Garden of Gethsemane is not the place of his death. The altar sacrifice is not the place of his death. It is Golgotha. And you'll notice that it was on the north side. You'll notice that Jesus says here in Hebrews, "For the bodies of those beasts whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned without the camp. Wherefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered without the gate." So we know that Jesus did not die even in Jerusalem. He died on the outside, okay? So moving on, you'll notice that Jesus dies on the north side, outside of Jerusalem. Looking at the map, you will notice, do you see that line there? And you see where the sanctuary is at? That line that's north of the sanctuary. Now the question is, where did Jesus die? Well, we have a common thought over here. And we have a common thought up there. But nobody really knows for sure, even if those two are really the right place. But regardless of which one is the right one, they're both on the other side of the north line.